wasn't it? I'm going to take you to Rome now. There is a meeting on ISIL. John Kerry's talking. As you can see, let's listen in.
Crete may serve as a model for other newly liberated communities, such as Ramadi, Sinjar, Kobani. As we all know, Assistant Secretary Special Envoy Brett Girk just went in with a couple of his colleagues, France and Britain, went into Kobani the other day, and he could personally tell you what he saw about what is happening. Beyond our financial support, we have another challenge. We have to help the government of Iraq remove the thousands of lethal explosives that are left behind by the terrorists. What happens is when Daesh leaves, almost every house they put a booby trap, hoping that when the family comes back or somebody opens a door or walks in, they're blown up. So the war continues in that sense. We, many of the countries around this table, have particular expertise in ordnance removal, and we need to do this. It also means we need to back the broad-based diplomatic effort to de-escalate the conflict and achieve a political transition in Syria. We've done a lot of work, everybody at this table. A lot of you are on the telephone, a lot of us have been talking together. The talks officially begin now in Geneva. Come back to that in a minute. But we have an opportunity here that we didn't have a few months ago, and my profound gratitude to every country that came to Vienna twice and to New York under tough circumstances. Everybody's schedules were pressed, but we got to the talks, and that was the objective. In Libya, we're on the brink of getting a government of national unity, and that will prevent Daesh from turning Libya into a stranglehold on that country's future. And as everybody here knows, that country has resources. The last thing in the world you want is a false caliphate with access to billions of dollars of oil revenue. So it means we need to push full speed ahead with training security personnel. And we need to ensure that there is a decisive military edge, not just clear territory, but to create a safe environment for a government to begin to stand up and operate. And this is, I think, a major obligation for those countries, us among them, who were there at the very beginning when we felt compelled to protect people from 10,000 or more people being slaughtered by the dictator of the country. Finally, our coalition has a profound responsibility to answer the urgent, the compelling, the stunning, to address the absolutely stunning images and reality of life for real people on the ground in Syria. This is required by international law, my friends, and it is required by simple human decency. The situation on the ground for the Syrian people is unfathomable. We haven't seen a catastrophe like this since World War II, and it's unfolding before our eyes. People in Madaya eating leaves and grass, or animals of one kind or another that they managed to capture. People who have not had a resupply for months. 113 requests by the United Nations to provide supply, and only 13 have been granted by the Assad regime. Starvation as a tactic of war is against the laws of war, and it is being used every single day as a tactic by the Assad regime. So we need to speak out powerfully about the urgent need of Geneva to deliver a ceasefire, to deliver humanitarian assistance, and to get civilians from stopping being bombed on a daily basis by those with airplanes who are dropping bombs. So I hope everybody here will join in calling for an immediate halt to the indiscriminate use of weapons and attacks on civilians, an end to the sieges around towns and population centers, and for the unimpeded delivery of humanitarian aid to every area designated by the UN as besieged or hard to reach. And the Syrian regime has a responsibility, in fact, all parties to the conflict have a duty to facilitate humanitarian access to Syrians in desperate need. And this has to happen not a week from now, not 2 weeks, not in a month. It shouldn't even be a bargaining chip. It ought to happen in the first days. And I hope everybody here will help us to make that happen. So with sufficient sufficient effort by everybody, with continued military, financial, and humanitarian contributions by the members of this coalition, I'm absolutely confident, I have no doubt, we are going to degrade and destroy Daesh. And we're going to do it not just because we're against what they're doing, which is enslaving people and destroying culture and destroying history, and trying to sell the notion that raping young women is somehow the will of God and that it's all right. But we're going to do it because everything that we stand for in terms of decency and civilization and culture and obeying the rules of law and order and rule of law itself is worth fighting for. It always has been. And every one of us has come together based on that notion. So this is a very important morning, a very important meeting, and we look forward in the course of the working group reports and the back and forth and give and take to clarifying even further how we can do this faster. The impact of this crisis on Jordan, on Lebanon, on Turkey, on the region, throughout the Horn of Africa, throughout all of the Arabian, South Central Asia, and the world. This narrative, which is a false narrative about Islam, a false narrative about legitimacy, about a state, requires every single one of us to get this job done as fast as we can. And I know everybody here is ready to roll up their sleeves and get to work. Thank you, Paula.
Thank you very much, John. This closes our session open to the press, so I ask the journalists and the cameras to leave the room, and we are now going to our
There was US Secretary of State John Kerry at a meeting in Rome. 23 countries are attending that meeting, all aimed to fight ISIL. He says, when it comes to Syria, I haven't seen anything like that since World War II, unfolding before their eyes, people in Medina eating grass. He also focused on what was happening in Libya at the moment with some hope there. Let's bring in our correspondent, Hashim Akhabari. He's live for us in Rome. Let's talk about Libya first. He seemed to be rather hopeful that ISIL's time there is limited, considering the government of national unity.
Jane, the international community is pretty much concerned about the territorial gains recently made by ISIL in Libya. Particularly, we're talking about a coastal area of about 160 kilometers from Bin Jawad east towards Basrata to the west, along with their stronghold in the city of Sirte. So this is basically talking about a platform on the doorsteps of Europe, and this is exactly why the international community is concerned. We're getting reports from different sources that the gathering here in Rome is definitely going to come up with some decisions about how to move forward and how to team up with regional players in North Africa and with the international community to replicate the scenario that has been done in Iraq and Syria, which is basically taking action against financing of ISIL in Libya and undermining its military capabilities and also stemming the rise of its ideology. It remains to be seen whether they will be able to come up with a clear strategy about the airstrikes, the military military action against ISIL, and also how to train the Libyan forces. The biggest problem they face now in Libya, Jane, is basically you have to have a strong united government in Libya with a national army that can take on ISIL. This is not something which is going to happen anytime soon because of the political divide. I think this is the reason why Kerry today was saying that we basically need to upgrade the military capabilities of their allies in Libya. But I think today in Rome they will try to think about different options, particularly airstrikes against ISIL in Libya.
Yeah, because he did mention airstrikes. He said it's unacceptable how many people are dying from airstrikes. We know that so many people are involved, including the Russians. This is having a devastating humanitarian impact.
Well, basically, the Americans, since the start of the anti-ISIL coalition in summer of 2014, they have been trying to expand the coalition because they have been concerned about the ramifications of the conflict in Syria and Iraq, with the potential more destabilization in countries, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa and in Northern Africa. And despite the fact that they have managed to undermine some of the military capabilities of ISIL, for example, in Syria and Iraq, but ISIL is still in control of huge areas, particularly in Raqqa, in the eastern part of Syria, and also northern parts of Iraq, and they don't seem to be really losing ground on those areas. And they're seeing that similar scenario being replicated in Libya, where ISIL has emerged as the most powerful organized military faction in Libya, taking advantage of the political divide. So they're looking for all the possible scenarios and the best possible action to be taken in the near future to put an end to this. Because if you look at the map now, Jane, and this is becoming a nightmare scenario for the Europeans and the Americans, with ISIL expanding in the coastal area, they can easily create a new platform where they can smuggle their own operatives to places like Italy, like Southern Europe, or like France, and launch attacks.
Okay.
And this is something that the international community is now willing to put an end to.
All right, thank you for that, Hashim Akhabara. We're getting breaking news from Iraq. Reports of a car bomb attack on a military headquarters just north of Ramadi. Let's go straight to our correspondent Imran Khan in Baghdad. What happened, Imran?
Well, I can tell you that this is a blow to the Iraqi security forces. They've long said that they control 95% of Ramadi, including the north where this attack happened. And what we hear is that there were at least 3 suicide car bombs that traveled to that base. The Iraqi army were able to repel 2 of them, but one of them got through, killing at least 18 people. Now, this tactic is one that we see quite a lot from ISIL. They use these car bombs to devastating effect. They are very difficult to defend against, but actually they normally attack checkpoints. They normally attack smaller Iraqi defensive positions. To actually go and attack a base will be a blow. Most of the fighting in Ramadi, which, as I say, is under about 95% control of the Iraqi security forces, is towards the east in Shujairiyah and Hadika neighborhoods in that area. So that's where they've been concentrating their fighting. So this is a blow to them. This is an attack in the north of the city, an area that the Iraqi security forces, as I say, said is in their control.
Thank you for that, Imran. Syria's government has launched a major offensive in Aleppo. It's taken the strategically important town of Hadnain. It's now one town away from Nubal and Zahra. Hundreds of families are leaving their homes because of the heavy Russian airstrikes on the area. The opposition meeting for talks in Geneva have condemned the offensive. They say it shows that the government is not genuinely seeking peace. Let's cross live to Zainab Khuda in Gaziantep on the Turkish side of the border with Syria. As the diplomatic talks are taking place in Geneva, tell us what's happening on the ground in Syria.
Well, Jane, no let-up in the fighting, no easing of the conflict on the ground. The army, as well as its allies, backed by Russian air power, are on the offensive in the northern countryside of Aleppo, a very strategic corner of Syria. What the army is doing is try to advance north to reach 2 loyalist towns, the Shia towns of Nubal and Zahra. And what we understand is that they're only 6 kilometers away from those towns. And once they reach those towns, they will be able to cut the road, the only rebel supply line from the Turkish border to rebel-controlled areas inside the city of Aleppo. So basically, they will cut the links between rebel-controlled areas in the city of Aleppo to the northern countryside. Many in the opposition really fear that there are tens of thousands of people inside the city who live in rebel-controlled areas. They will be under siege. So this offensive is taking place while efforts to bring about peace happening in Geneva. Undoubtedly, this will be a strategic win for the government, because what the government has been trying to do is cut the rebel supply lines to Turkey, because Turkey has been their lifeline. They're not only just pushing north in the Aleppo province, they have been pushing north in the western province of Latakia. Now, this is what's happening in one corner of Syria, but in another corner of Syria, civilians are suffering. They are starving and living in fear. According to activists from the eastern province of Deir ez-Zor, it is the forgotten corner of Syria. They are from Deir ez-Zor, but these young men came to southern Turkey to escape from the powers on the ground, ISIL and the Syrian government. They hide their identities to protect activists back home who help them broadcast to the world what otherwise would not be seen. Activists from a group that calls itself Deir ez-Zor is being slaughtered silently provide rare images and information from the mainly ISIL-controlled province. Al Jazeera is not able to independently verify these videos. ISIL is known for its harsh rule, and activists say in Deir ez-Zor it is particularly brutal because it's facing resistance.
The emirs don't feel safe because people are fighting back. There are sleeper cells that target ISIL members, and while many Syrians joined ISIL, they're not loyal. They joined out of fear or to get a salary.
Life is just as hard in government districts in the provincial capital. People are poor and hungry. ISIL has besieged areas where some 200,000 people live. Food is scarce and expensive. The UN says there have been deaths from starvation, but activists say they are facing a double blockade because the government prevents aid agencies from bringing in supplies through the military airport.
The people are faced with two realities. In regime areas, they're starving. If they manage to leave, the only way out is through ISIL territories, and there's no guarantee they won't be killed by ISIL.
People need to apply for permission to leave, and activists say they need to pay money, which many don't have. Those close to the government are able to travel from a military airbase. The other way out is by foot through ISIL territory, and that is a risk because activists say the armed group has harassed and killed people, accusing them of working with the government. Much of Deir ez-Zor is in ISIL's hands. The province links its capital Raqqa to Iraq, allowing the armed group to move freely between its strongholds in both countries. It is also rich in oil. The US-led coalition has been targeting oil fields in the area to cut ISIL's main source of revenue, but activists say it has only caused more suffering for the people.
Yes, the strikes have cut ISIL revenues, but they're still selling oil and the price has increased. Civilians suffer because they need oil, especially during the winter.
It is dangerous to get messages out, either from ISIL or government-held areas. But those who manage to do so say they want to remind the world about what they call the forgotten corner of Syria.
The World Health Organization